What's going on, guys? Welcome back into the channel. In today's video, I want to talk about a little bit of an oddball topic, but pretty much directly related to my last video. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about whether or not you should edit players in order to essentially simulate development and simulate regression within MLB The Show. Now, I'm sure if you've clicked onto this video, you're probably a franchise player, and you've probably had your fair share of experience with players that don't quite develop as quickly as you think they would, even if they're playing really well. And I'm sure you've had your fair share of players that develop faster than they probably should based on the performance that they've actually seen within the game. A good example here of a player that I'm talking about is Jack Leiter, the starting pitcher. As a prospect, he just quite hasn't developed as fast as I would have liked him to. Now, that's not to say that he's not, still at a position that he can't develop further, but for whatever reason, with really solid performance so far in his time within the league, he really has not gone up in terms of overall much, if at all. And he's gotten a couple of stat attributes, but he's been around and he's had time. And yet he still has not quite developed up to a very high overall. He's even at this point been up to the MLB. He's 6-4 as a starting pitcher with a 1.77 ERA. So you would think that his overall would go up a little bit, but it's not going up at quite as fast of a rate as you might expect. On the flip side here, you have a starting pitcher with the likes of Mitch Keller, who hasn't really done all that well himself, having about a 4.4 ERA and even higher than that within the past couple of seasons, and he's up to an 85 overall as a 26-year-old. He's gone up quite a bit more than I might have expected him to, probably because of his potential and things like that, but he's gone basically above his performance level, considering how many losses he has versus wins, considering what his ERA is, he probably shouldn't be going up to an 85 overall. And then that poses the question of, well, should we be editing these players for their performances season to season and based on their development and things like that? And my answer to you is, if you want to have a realistic franchise, yes, you probably should be editing players' overalls and potentials based on their performance and things like that. Now, there are a couple of factors that go into that. Number one and foremost, it's a lot of work to consistently keep up with your players' ratings and developments, and it's hard to not be biased. It's hard to approach it realistically. If you believe that you can, face it and approach it in a non-biased way, and you can upgrade the players that truly deserve an upgrade, and you can downgrade the players that truly deserve a downgrade, and you can be balanced with your opinions on it, then my recommendation is yes, you probably should be editing players up and down in terms of their overall, in terms of their potential, based on how they're performing and everything like that. Let me get into the major theory behind why I suggest that you do edit your overalls for these players based off their performances and whatnot. So, the thing that you have to consider here, or the thing that I would like you to consider, is what do the developers do every single year going from one game to another, whether it be in Madden, whether it be in MLB, NHL, any sports game. What do they do whenever they create the rosters going from one year to another? Well, simply put, they edit the ratings based on the performance from the prior year. Now, one thing to consider here is that a lot of players will have their career performances taken into account. And one thing to consider here is that the rosters provided by a lot of these game developers aren't necessarily the best rosters in the world. But from a standpoint of approaching things realistically, you're going to have different ratings for these players approaching every single year. And so if Jack Leiter finishes an entire year with a 1.77 ERA, it would stand to reason that in next year's MLB game, he would be somewhere in the 80s or 90s in terms of overall. Now, the game is not going to allow him to progress that quickly. It just simply isn't. That's not how it works. So, my recommendation is to find somewhere in the middle that is realistic for you. One of my major complaints with rosters going from year to year, especially with MLB, with Madden, various different sports games, is that they weight recent performance way too heavily. So if a player has one good year, they jump that player up really high in terms of their overall. They're also very biased as to which teams they actually improve players on and which teams they don't. So for example, the Pirates' second baseman, Adam Frazier, was only a mid-80s player, even though he was playing at an elite level for more than one season whenever he was on the Pirates roster. However, the moment that he got traded to another team, and literally the moment that he was traded to another team and they came out with a new roster, he jumped into the 90s. You guys can see here, the moment that Adam Frazier was traded to the Padres, he becomes a 91 overall. So it's kind of amazing how that works and how they do that within the rosters. And so that's a major complaint, and that's why I caution you guys, whenever you do edit your rosters, if you do, and if you try to keep up with your players' performance and try to keep their ratings and developments realistic with their performance, try to approach it from a reasonable, unbiased, realistic perspective. How would somebody see this player from the outside? How do I see this player, and how would somebody else see this player? Maybe you can even come up with your own grading system of if they have a certain ERA, if they have a certain batting average, if they reach a certain number of home runs, then that qualifies them for a boost in certain areas. Personally speaking, I like to weight my player ratings for all different games based on career performance. I am not the type of person to give somebody a very high rating based simply on 1 year's performance. However, if you consistently prove to me that you can play at a certain level, then you deserve to have a certain overall, even in situations where you might have a little bit of an off year. So, for example, players like Julio Jones in the NFL and players like that, or even in the MLB, players like Andrew McCutchen and certain older players end up having maybe a little bit of a higher rating than their prior year's performance would have given them because they've done it for so long. They've had a top-notch elite career for a certain amount of time. And so likewise, I try to go based off of whether players have performed at a high level for multiple seasons in a row. So have you given me a sub-3 ERA for 2 seasons? Have you done it for 3 seasons? Have your ratings continued to improve? Did you have a 4 ERA this year, a 3 ERA the next year, and then a 2.5 ERA the year after that? That shows improvement, and if your rating does not follow that, then it might be time for you to step in and kind of take over for where the system within this game is lacking and try to compensate and try to make it as realistic as possible for you. Because, like I said, if you're trying to approach it realistically, these ratings are going to better reflect the player's performance if you step in and do a couple of things, because the system is not perfect. And like I said, I'm sure you've all had experiences where players aren't developing even though they're performing well, or players are developing at a fast rate but they're not even performing very well. However, the final note that I'll leave you with is, if the amount of time and effort that you have to put into keeping up with these things isn't worth it for you, then you don't have to do it. The system in the game isn't completely broken. It's not like it's a horrible system. Your players will progress at a reasonable rate most of the time. Your players are probably not going to regress very fast. I mean, if they have C and D potential, then they might lose their potential. They might lose their overalls and things like that. But generally speaking, I feel that the system in this game is not absolutely bad. I think that it's actually a pretty solid system. It's just not had all of its kinks worked out. I don't know if they really know that there are some of the issues with the development system in the game that there are, but like I said, if you do have the time to commit to it, and if you can be unbiased about it, then I definitely recommend you try to take a look at these. If you want a challenge within your franchise modes, that is the time that I would recommend you don't edit your players at all and you don't touch things, because like I said, this game's system is a little bit more favored towards regression than it is progression. And so you're going to have more of a challenge building a roster if you're not intervening in that system. It's going to be a little bit more difficult. So those are my final recommendations. I just figured this was a good video to have out there, kind of in coordination with the recent videos that I've made, because I think they kind of go hand in hand whenever you're talking about franchise mode. If this video was helpful to anybody, or if you just enjoyed the topic of discussion, leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and comment down below with anything you'd like to see next. I'll see you in the next one, and I hope you have a good one.